standing up, just waiting.
You're waiting on me to move?
Just waiting for my sign. What I'm going to do now.
Yeah, you're way over here now.
Yeah.
See how it feels, buddy.
You're afraid it's going to rain. Is what the deal is.
It's not going to rain.
All right. Shut up. I'm reading Tobit real fast.
Okay. All right, we're live. You don't know if you already know that or not yet.
Hey, everyone. Oh, someone left.
Let's get the feeling like you
Rylan's
we're quite sure yet.
mean.
Yeah.
This is how I really am to Steven all the time.
All right, let me pull this a little closer. It doesn't have to be all that way away, right? Hey, everybody. How's it going? Hope you had a great day. I've had a great day. Have you had a good day?
It's been a pretty good day. Got up really early and ran.
Yeah?
That was tiring, but it was nice. It rained on us.
That's good.
Yeah.
Kelly's
Celia.
part of Ryland's running group. All right, So let us know who else is there. So Dave and Celia are here, and as you kind of come in and let us know so that we kind of know who we're dealing with today. We are starting something very different, and it may be that you guys love it. It may be that you don't. Sometimes, you don't. It's okay. Yeah. Brent and Isla, welcome. We're glad that you guys are here too. Mm-hmm. So what we're going to be doing for the next few weeks. So we've been on this for months now, for several months. We did like a long view of Scripture. Mm-hmm. Okay, and it was kind of like a big picture look at how we got to the New Testament, like all the story of Scripture and how it works, right? Yeah. And then we kind of did the same thing, but not in Scripture. We kind of did it outside of Scripture. We did it.
Yeah, like church history.
Yeah, history. Yeah. And we started with after the New Testament and started working on what the story was that got us to here. And for just a few weeks, I mean, we're not going to do all these books, but I think for maybe the next 3 or 4 weeks, okay, we want to look at something that's, it's similar to both of those things in a way, right?
Yeah, because I think it's connected in ways that we don't realize.
Yes, that's absolutely true. So we want to look at some of the books of the Apocrypha, okay? And if you are not very familiar with the Apocrypha, I think most of us know the Apocrypha as like the books that are not in our Bible. Yeah. But they are... I think of them as being very significant things to study historically, okay, and I don't think we should give them the same attention that we give the New and Old Testaments, for instance, but I don't think they have the same weight as Scripture in terms of like being canon. But I think just like we study church history to kind of understand where we are in the context of history, I think the apocryphal books give us like a really significant cultural context for the Bible. They give us this literary and cultural context into which that just kind of lets us understand the people to whom we're looking.
So, like, whether or not we think that these are actual scriptures,
canon,
canon scriptures, the people in the first century were reading them.
Yeah, right? and they're
familiar with
very familiar, and they're very very like woven into the cultural kind of context. Yeah. Okay, and say this, right? Like if you read in the paper tomorrow that there was an archaeological dig in Samaria, and they had unearthed like all this new information about the capital city of the northern kingdom during the time of Rehoboam or Jeroboam, or King Ahab or something like that, right? Like you'd be curious about that, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
I would. Yeah, I'd be really curious about that. And if they were like, and part of what we dug up was this scroll that tells like that has these collected stories of wisdom, from that era, I'd be like, oh, I got to know about that. Yeah. Well, what we don't realize is that in our quickness to turn away to kind of not pay attention to the Apocrypha, like that's really the kind of documents that we're talking about, right? It's these ancient books that predate the New Testament, and that really give us like incredible cultural insight. Yeah. Not just and cultural, including religious and spiritual insight. into what was going on in those people. So I think they're useful. All that to say, and I think the best argument for me for seeing both how they're useful and maybe also finding the boundary of like what they are and what they're not. I think the best way to really understand that is to read them. Okay, and for me that was a really fuzzy line. Like, is it useful or is it not useful or not, or what's the deal with them? And I didn't really understand that until I started reading them, and then I was like, oh, I get it now. Like, this isn't something that I'm going to like.
You come up with a new theology from
or maybe put my faith in a way. But I can enjoy reading them, and I can learn from them, and I can also have a better understanding of the Scripture of the Bible because of them too. So that's what I think these books. And I would just want to encourage. And part of what I want us to do here is I want to offer the sampler platter.
I like it.
You like that? So we're going to get a sampler platter, and I don't know if you did this, but when you were getting married, did you have to like sample different kinds of cakes and things to decide like which one you were going to actually do?
I think that we did.
I think we had. I think that's kind of a rite of passage. Yeah.
Fun time.
Well, this is the sampler, okay, and we want to give this to you. We want to kind of introduce you guys to these books a little bit. And I want to encourage you to read them. I think you'll find that they're pretty neat. And I'll tell you what, Tobit has a place in my heart. Okay, and let me tell you why. I've kind of thought this about the Apocryphal books for some time, and one time I read this to a youth group when Kelly was when Kelly was an intern, and she. And it was the craziest thing. It was one of the craziest things I've ever done because we were on this youth group trip where like these kids were like throwing up. We'd been at like an amusement park. We'd been at Six Flags, and they'd eaten a bunch of junk food. And then we had like one kid that got sick and like threw up on the van.
And then everyone started.
And then it made everybody else sick. And so it was this like van full of miserable kids. And I was like, y'all, I want to just everybody try to chill out. I want to kind of read you the stories. I read them Tobit. Yeah. It's a really.
But they remember that.
I'm sure not at all. I bet you they remember that trip. Actually, they may remember it. They probably don't remember exactly what we read. I bet they remember everybody being sick and then me reading something out loud to them. Any rate.
All right.
So. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we're about to dig into Tobit, right?
Yeah.
A little bit. And if you want to follow along with us and you're not sure how to get to Tobit, number one, you can Google it. You can probably find it pretty easy online. Or if you've got like your phone or something, you can go to the Bible app, and the Catholic Public Domain version of the Bible on the Bible app has the Apocrypha. And then you can just scroll through the books of the Bible, and then there's some extra ones. Like after Nehemiah, you got Tobit, Judith, and then you got Esther and Job and Psalm and Proverbs. And then you go further down, you got Sirach and Baruch. And so they're not necessarily just all together.
Hey, look and see if the NRSV has those in there. It very well could. That's actually the version I'm reading is the NRSV.
I don't remember seeing that in the NRSV.
Yeah,
but I will look.
I don't remember. I don't know if they included in there on that particular.
They're in
version
alphabetical order when you hit your version.
There, no.
RSV.
Oh, they may. Oh,
here. I bet the NRSV CI.
Yeah. I bet that's true too.
Yep, it does. Yeah. So NRSV-CI is the Catholic International Version or Catholic.
This is kind of. I think this is like a Anglican version.
What's interconfessional?
I don't know.
Interconfessional.
An ecumenical version is what it would be. I would guess. Okay.
There you go.
I bet it would be Catholic and Anglican. It'd be, I guess.
Okay.
Any rate, so we're not going to read this whole thing, but we want to kind of. I want because it's it's a storytelling. I want to tell you the story of Tobit. Tobit is a narrative, okay, and I want us to I want to sketch like a rough version of this narrative and do it in as much of a storytelling kind of way as I can, and then what I'd like to do is I want to read a couple of specific passages in it that I think are significant. Okay, so Tobit is a person who he's a Jew, and I'll say that. Actually, I don't know if we would. I'm not sure that we would necessarily call him a Jew, because maybe more like a Hebrew or an Israelite.
He's from the northern
because he's
kingdom,
from the
right?
northern kingdom, so that would
Yeah.
predate that. But maybe so. I mean, because really, what's happening in this story is. This is a story that is making an argument for what it means to retain Jewish spirituality and culture in the face of exile. Okay? Like that's what it's doing.
Yeah.
All right? And so it is written for a Jewish audience. Okay? But he technically, I don't know if we would call him a Jew or not. I have to kind of think about that a little bit. But he's from the northern kingdom. He's from the tribe of Naphtali. Okay, and he's very proud of that heritage, but he's living after the Assyrian invasion, which happened in 722. Okay, when the Assyrians were destroyed, when the Assyrians destroyed the northern tribes. Okay, and he's actually taken into exile. Now, that wasn't necessarily the way the Assyrians handle things, but there are some of the they're captives taken, okay? And so he's taken back to Nineveh. And we should say, like, the story is a little fast and loose with that, because it's a fictionalized sort of account, right? Okay.
So is this like a parable? Like a really long parable, or?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking about it.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's just like I think I've heard it called a novelette.
Okay. Like
or a
historical
novella.
fiction.
A novella. Yeah. Like a short story. That's
Yeah.
what it is. Okay. And So Tobit is living in exile. He's living in the city of Nineveh, a great enemy of God's people. And he finds, much like Joseph or later Daniel, Esther, he in the tradition of these Hebrew characters that find themselves at the service of some foreign king, Tobit becomes a servant of the kings in Nineveh. And also in the tradition of that, he finds himself kind of at odds because of practices that he's doing that make him stand out as a Jew. Okay?
It sounds a lot like Daniel so far.
Yes, it's very much like that. Okay, very much like that. And we'll come to that very specific practice in a way. And so this kind of chain of unfortunate things happens to him. That's kind of like Tobit is like super unfortunate. He's unlucky at the beginning of the story. Okay, so what happens is what he's doing to show his piety and his love of his countrymen is that there are his countrymen that have made their home in Nineveh. They're being persecuted. And it kind of appears like random violence, okay? And what we don't understand, okay, is what's happening is these Jews are being killed and then their bodies are being left, okay? Their bodies are being left basically on display, okay, or on the wall or just outside, or something like that, and they're not being buried properly. And Tobit finds this to be abhorrent, and so he believes it's very important for him to faithfully keep the custom of burying his countrymen. Okay? And what we don't understand, we don't really have any clarity about why that was prohibited or anything like that, but it seems like he almost becomes like a vigilante of burial. Okay, I don't know how to say it. Like he's like,
okay.
Like that's his superhero thing that he's doing is he's like going and burying these, and then he starts doing it at night, okay, in secrecy, to kind of avoid it. And he has a little bit of a rise and fall, but because he keeps doing this and he does it at night, there are people that are he's forced into doing it at night because people are like going to be on to him. So he's kind of secretly, after he finds out somebody's dead, he like goes and does it. And so the story really heats up. There's a time where he's holding a feast, okay, and it's. I think it's at Pentecost, and and it says that he has had he comes home from work basically and finds that his wife has made this incredible feast. There's just like piles of meat there, it says, okay, and he is so amazed at the quantity of food there because his prosperity is plenty. Okay, that he sends his son. He says, "Son, I want you to go out into the streets, and I want you to find one of our countrymen that's poor, and I want you to invite them to come to our table and share this feast with us." Okay, and so he goes to do that, and he does, and he finds somebody. He comes back, but when he comes back, he says, "Father, I saw another one of our fellow Jews has been killed, and their body is laying out there. They've been strangled and left in the courtyard," I think is what it was. It's really, really telling. And so Tobit is like, "Well, I refuse to eat this meal while that disgrace is going on." And so he gets up, and under the cover of night, he like steals the body away and takes it outside the walls of the city, and he buries this body. And he's so tired from doing it that he doesn't want to be seen coming back into the city, and he just sits down outside against the wall. He leans back up against the wall, and he goes to sleep. Okay, and something very, very, very tragic and sort of comic happens. There are birds who are nesting in the wall, and one of the birds defecates.
Okay.
And bird droppings fall into his eyes, and it blinds him.
All right.
I mean, it's like comically bad. Like I told you, like bad luck is like the deal. So Tobit goes blind because a bird poops in his eyes. Okay, that's just the way the story goes. Okay, and I don't know if you've ever heard of that of a story like that being in the Apocrypha, but this is it. Okay, and so when that happens, Tobit is blind, and it creates this dominoes where he starts like their family starts to become impoverished. His wife has to like begin working these other jobs, these kind of menial tasks, and they're kind of on this downward slide. Okay, so much so that at one point his wife is given a gift of a goat for her wages. Okay, and she comes back and he's like, "Oh, we've become this charity case, or you've stolen this goat," or something like that. I don't remember exactly what his accusation. He accuses her. He really snaps at her. It's really unfair. And she's like, "Man, why are you, stop fussing at me. This was part of my pay. Like, I worked for this goat." And then she basically says, "Where's all those good deeds that you did? Like, why are basically like, you're sitting there a blind man, and now you're like this bitter old blind man, and your life has become meaningless, because all that good stuff that you used to do is just nothing now, right?"
Yeah.
And so when she does that, we have a scene that's very much like when Tobit, or very much like Job, when Job is told by his wife, he's cursed by his wife, right? "Why don't you just curse God and die?" Right.
Yep.
And so Tobit prays for death. Okay. And then the story cuts. Okay, the story cuts. And it cuts to a woman who is one of his kin. And her name is Sarah. And Sarah is a woman who has been married 7 times. Okay? Unfortunately, what has happened is that some demon has become infatuated with her. And every time she gets married, on her wedding night, before she and her husband can consummate their marriage, they go into the bedroom, and this demon kills her new groom.
And she keeps marrying people anyway.
And it's happened 7 times.
At some point, you have to figure that she wants her husband to die.
She keeps praying for deliverance. They keep hoping something, and actually, so what she comes to this place too. And there's no male heirs in the family, so like she's like the one who's like the last hope for the family. I'm hearing a lot of things in the story so far that pop up in Jesus' life. Yeah, like there's questions, right? Like if a 7 brothers marry the same woman, like whose wife does she end up being? Yeah, absolutely, right.
Or like a parable, like go and find the poor people.
Go into there's a banquet. Yeah, right. Like I said, there's like allusions to this stuff, right? Okay, so So Sarah is so frustrated that she too prays,
Yeah.
God, just let me die. I'm tired of this disgrace, because she's trapped. In order to protect her family honor, she has to kind of keep going through this charade. But because of, she's terrified. She's terrified. This is it's horrific and traumatic, right? It really is terrible. And so that story, and then it says that God sends an angel. And the angel has a famous name. And you guys have all heard this name. You just didn't realize that this is where that name comes from. It is the angel named Raphael.
Uh-huh.
Not the Ninja Turtle, not the Renaissance painter, but the angel for whom both of those characters are named. Okay? Or the turtle is named after the painter, as a chain.
Probably.
Okay. All right. So Raphael is sent to give both of them deliverance. He hears the cry of both Tobit and of Sarah, and he's sent to them. Okay. Now Tobit has a son, Tobias, the one that was sent out to go find. Okay. And we cut back to Tobias or to Tobit, and Tobit realizes that he had given 10 talents of silver. He had kind of put them in the bank with a far off person in Media, in the kingdom of Media. Okay, and he basically says, before I die, I need to make sure that my son has that money. Okay, so
that's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a ton of money, and it's a great inheritance, and they're impoverished, and so basically he's like, I just got to take care of this thing before I die. He's like fixing his life insurance.
Yeah.
Okay, because he's prayed to die, and so he believes God's going to grant that prayer. Yeah, and he says that, now that I've prayed for that, I need to get ready to do it. I need to get ready to die. And he takes his son, and he prepares his son for this journey. He says, but you need to find somebody that knows that area. Okay, and so he goes out to the streets, like finding somebody that can be a guide for him. And who does he bump into?
Sarah.
No, he bumps into Raphael. Yeah, Raphael. Okay. Raphael. And there's a lot of real funny wordplay here, or not wordplay, but just kind of clever stuff that the narrator does that we don't know about. Tobit keeps saying things like, I'm going to send you on this journey, and I just pray that God's angel will be with you, And Raphael's like standing there, and he's like, don't tell him, wink, wink, right? Yeah. Okay, and so this angel accompanies him, and they begin to set out on this journey. Okay, but while they're on the journey, they sit down and to cool off and to rest. Really, they sit down by a lake and they take their sandals off and they put their feet put their feet in the water.
Who wouldn't?
Right? Who wouldn't?
Who wouldn't do that?
Well, maybe after this story, I bet they didn't. I bet Tobias was not keen on doing that anymore. Okay, because what happens is a large fish starts attacking and trying to swallow his foot.
Okay.
So he starts getting attacked on this journey. Okay, and he pulls his foot out, and the fish is like jumping out of the fish jumps out of the water, continuing to try to attack him. To try to attack his foot. And Raphael yells over at him. He's like a distance away. Raphael yells over at him, make sure you catch that fish. Don't let it get away. Right? And so he keeps it from getting back in the water. He drags it up and kills it.
Yeah.
And he's like, man, what? He's like, why'd you do that? And he's like, oh, well, I just need that fish. And so he tells him, and then he tells him this. He says, you need the heart, the liver, and the gall. These organs in there, right? You need those things because they can be useful to us. And so they take out these organs, and he says, you don't need the intestines. That'll just stink. Just get rid of, you don't need the intestines. But these other things, you need these. I'm telling you, it's really weird.
Are you supposed to be thinking of Jonah at all? Is there Nineveh?
I don't know about that. Well, it's interesting, because the Nineveh connection too. But I don't know about that. That's an interesting question. Maybe it's certainly possible. Although the purpose of Jonah is God's grace to the foreigners, which is not on the table here. In fact, at the end of the story,
opposite.
Yeah. Okay. But in this moment, he tells him specifically, and this is kind of a spoiler alert for the story. Okay, but he says, you can take the heart and liver, and if you burn them, it'll scare away you can be useful for exorcising a demon. And it scares away demons. Okay. And he says, and if you take the gall, you can use something to make medicine, which can heal a blind man. All right. So, spoiler alert. Here we go. Okay.
Let's see what they're doing.
So the story is on. Yeah, Jordan, it does sound like somebody's just totally making it. It is a yarn. This is a tale. It is a yarn. Okay. All right. So they go on. And in the next town that they come to, as they're going into the town, Raphael says, hey, by the way, we're going into this town, and I happen to know that one of your relatives lives here, and he has a daughter named Sarah, who I happen to know needs a husband, and you're the next in line. And so Raphael says that to Tobit, or to Tobias. Tobias is the son. And Tobias says, well, I happen to know the Sarah that you're talking to, and all her husbands end up dead. And I'm not sure I'm up to this gig, right?
So he knows about it.
Yes, right. Yeah, he's heard about it, and Raphael's just like, trust me. Tells him like basically, no. And he actually puts a kind of guilt trip on it. He says like, no, it's your responsibility. You're the last in line as a kinsman. This is like your duty, okay? But basically, he's like, it'll be okay, and he just asks him to trust God in it. So they get there, they meet the grooms, or they meet Sarah's family, and Sarah's dad is like, this is a bad idea. He's like, seriously?
You don't want to do this.
He's like, this is a bad idea. Let's tell you what. And he tries to put him off. He says, tell you what, let's just have a meal together. Maybe we'll talk about it later. And Tobit does something kind of like his dad would, or Tobias does something like Tobit would have done, and says, I am not going along with this feast. I'm not doing anything until you settle what is my right, the things that pertain to me. He just basically claims the right to marry this woman. And they're like, all right, suit yourself. And they get out paper and they write a wedding contract on the spot, and they are wed. Okay. And so they go in, and as soon as he goes, they come into the bridal, the chamber, the bed chamber. And by the way, like before that happens, I should say, like Sarah's mother like pulls her in close, and she's like, I'm so sorry this has to happen again. And she's like, she is weeping, not because she's excited over the wedding, but she's like, oh my gosh, we have to go through all of this yet again. There's like a lot of pain in this story. There really is a lot of pain in this story. But they get in there, and as soon as Tobias goes in, he sees like a incense, like a tray with incense on it, right? Like a bowl of incense that has hot coals on it for incense. But instead of incense, he reaches into his pouch, and he has the heart and the liver of the fish, and so he throws those on the coals.
How does he know to do that? He just knows.
He just knows. Well, he'd been told to burn it. He had been told to burn it and like use the ashes or something like that. Okay, so he throws that on.
By Raphael?
Yeah, Raphael's kind of giving him like some lowdown. Okay, so he does that, and it says that the demon comes in and smells the stench of this. Which, by the way, how gross did that smell? Like this thing's supposed to be for incense, and he throws a fish heart and a liver on there. That's like super gross. I'm sure it was stank, right? And so it's the demon is so repulsed by it. It says the demon runs away all the way to Egypt. And remember, they're not even in Israel. They're in like they're on the east side of Nineveh at this point because they're traveling. Media is is east of, so they're going the other way, right? He basically runs from Persia all the way to.
That must have spelled bad.
To Egypt, yeah, right. But Raphael, not only does the demon Asarius run away, but also Raphael chases him, and when they get to Egypt, he ties him up so that he can't come back.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
Which is very convenient. Okay, all right. Meanwhile, and so they are able to make love, and they
consummate their marriage.
They consummate their marriage, and they go to sleep.
Okay.
Meanwhile, another little cutscene here. Okay. Meanwhile, her dad, realizing that this whole thing has just been a terrible disaster. And they're really tired of, like, coming in the morning, dead body, and then the weeping of Sarah's trauma. They really are concerned for, like, her going through the trauma of all that again. And so they say, listen, here's what we need to do. We need to, he tells his servants, I want you to go outside and dig a grave.
Mm-hmm. I mean...
And also, he doesn't want to have to withstand, like, the ridicule of the community again, like when they're out there doing this. So he's like, I want you to go, and I want you to dig a grave, and then we're going to go in there in the middle of the night. We're going to get his dead body out of there.
This is a very Tobit thing to do.
Yeah, it's about the burial thing. It's like the motif. Yeah, the burial thing is a motif. So, except for this time, it's like because he doesn't want to be ashamed because he has to do it in the day. Right? So they say go. So they dig the grave, and he's like, all right, let's go in there and get the body so that when she wakes up, it'll already be gone. Then they go in. They send a servant in there with like a little lantern, a lamp, and she goes in. She checks, and she's like, they're still breathing. They're both still breathing.
I'm glad that they checked.
Yeah,
I was afraid where this was going.
So they come back. The servant comes outside. It's like this. They're both still breathing, and it's okay. And so her dad is like, really? That's awesome. And he's like, hey, you guys go fill that hole in before anybody knows. So he doesn't want Tobias even to know about it. So Tobias doesn't even hear about it.
It's double embarrassing now.
Yeah,
they just assume.
So all that said, there's this big celebration. There's kind of like they don't leave because the wedding celebration is going to go on for a while, and they're celebrating. Meanwhile, Tobit and his wife are afraid that something has happened, and so they are mourning because they think they've lost their son. And there's kind of this like juxtaposition of the weeping of Tobit and his wife and the weeping of celebration that's going on with the wedding. But at any rate, the rest of the story is not that complicated, really. They just go back home, and then they find out that they say all this stuff has happened, and Tobias tells his dad that he's been married and all this kind of stuff, and they celebrate that because earlier Tobit had told him, I want you to make sure that you marry one of our kinsmen. Like, don't marry an Assyrian, basically. Okay. And so that's his hope for his son has been fulfilled. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, he says, and we've got this, and he crushes up the gall and makes this medicine. He puts it on his eyes. It says it hurt. And then he reaches over and he pulls this film off of his father's eyes, and he can see again. And that's the story. That's
a lot like Jesus too, right?
Very
the
much
scales
so.
Like a fish coming off someone's eyes.
Okay. That story is the scales thing is from Saul, I think. But yes, like Ananias. But yes, there's kind of a motif there. But at any rate, the story. But the healing of a blind person is absolutely a motif through the story of Jesus. Also, too, there's in kind of the epilogue to the story. There's a celebration of that God has helped things turn out okay for Tobit and for his son. And I guess the motif of the whole story is how God takes care of his faithful people. Okay?
Even though it doesn't seem like it, maybe in the middle.
Right, and even though, there's lots of stories in Scripture like this, right? And Tobit is kind of playing off those stories in the Hebrew Bible by having these kind of up and down. So it's kind of calling. Of course, it's calling on like the Joseph story or the Daniel story, or it's calling on all these other stories that kind of pick the roller coaster of being a Jew. Mm-hmm. That's really it. I mean, and this is really part of
or an Israelite in his case.
Yeah, but it's one of those stories that I don't know that we really appreciate how much the biblical literature is meant to prepare us for the roller coaster of ups and downs of life, right? And this is a deeply held belief in the Hebrew Bible and in the New Testament too, that it's very possible, like, suffering does not indicate spiritual failure.
Yeah.
It doesn't, like, even though we are so tempted over and over again to believe that when somebody goes to something, it's because they've done something bad. And Jesus is fighting that all the time, right?
Yeah.
Notably, in the story of a blind man, right? Who sinned, this man or his parents, right?
Yeah.
Neither. It's for the glory of God, right?
Yeah.
There's this constant motif of that, or this. That's just a question that always comes up. Is this bad thing that's happening part of a punishment of something that I've done? And the answer is maybe. Maybe
That's
not.
one of the things you learn from like Proverbs, right? And in Psalms is that like if you're wicked, bad things are going to happen to you.
Yeah. And that
the
can
simplification of like being good and being bad and making good decisions and bad decisions.
But it's not meant to be a universal explanation of where the bad things come from.
Yeah.
It is a general rule of how things work.
Yeah.
But it's not a universal rule. And so you have things like in the Psalms where like the psalmists are saying, I have been nothing but faithful. Why am I been dragged into the pit by these enemies?
Right. Mm-hmm.
When are you going to rise up, O Lord, and deliver me? Or you have, stories like the book of Job where Job is a faithful person.
I was going to say overall, Tobit seems most like Job more than any other.
It does. Except for you don't have that whole middle section where he's like crying out.
And nothing like... permanently bad happens to him. Like his whole family doesn't die.
He's restored. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, he's restored in the end, but it's like, but his whole family still died. But
yeah, you might say that, and I think that's largely true. I agree with that. But it's also true that he still lives in Nineveh.
Yeah.
Right. And even part of the story, like there's here's another thing for it. Okay, is that Tobit actually at several points like actually gives you a little bit better understanding of the suffering, okay?
Yeah.
That's maybe not offered in somewhere else, right? How about this, all right? This is in chapter 3, and this is a prayer from Tobit. This is the prayer that he actually is going to cry out and ask for death, okay? But notice the nuanced way that he talks about his suffering here. You are righteous, O Lord, and all your deeds are just. All your ways are mercy and truth, and you judge the world. And now, O Lord, remember me and look favorably upon me. Do not punish me for my sins or for my unwitting offenses and those that my ancestors committed before you. They sinned against you and disobeyed your commandments. And so you gave us over to plunder, exile, and death, to become the talk, the byword, and the object of reproach among all the nations among whom you have dispersed us. Right? And now your many judgments are true and exacting penalty from me for my sins, for we have not kept your commandments and not walked in accordance with truth before you. So now deal with me as you will. Command my spirit to be taken from me, so that I may be released from the face of the earth and become dust. Okay? All right, so here's something a little different, right? Like that's very different than the tone that Job strikes, which Job's tone is, I am innocent. I do not deserve to be punished, right?
Yeah.
Tobit's is, I have sinned. And not only have I sinned, but my ancestors sinned. Yeah. Right? And the stuff that I'm suffering, it's not necessarily because of his sin. It may be because of his ancestors' sin. You know what I mean? Like there's just other consequences in the world that kind of come to stuff.
Yeah, when the Syrians come and destroy your country and take you captive, that's not necessarily because of anything you did.
But it's maybe because of what your people did.
What your king did and your people did and everything else.
But at the same time, he doesn't claim to be innocent either, right? Like, you see what I'm saying? Like there's this...
Although, as far as we know, he was, right? From the story, from what we're told
the story portrays him at that.
It's kind of like
and
a
then
Daniel character.
Yeah, that's right. The story portrays him as innocent and certainly righteous and just, okay? But he acknowledges, I may have he said my unwitting offenses. Sure. Right? So he says, there's some things that I've done, but I don't think I deserve all this. Yeah. I may have sinned, but this is too much. It's kind of the line there. So but all that to say, I think Tobit has this kind of nuanced understanding of suffering that is, it may be because of some things that you've done, and it may not be. It may be just because... It may be because your ancestors did something, or it may be because there's an evil demon that's running loose in the world. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like there's just these alternate causes of grief. And so I think that's one of the things that offers us. And I think that was important for God's people when they found themselves kind of constantly going through these cycles of suffering. Like, how do you understand that? Right? And this is, I think this is answering something.
He starts out in a bad place, right? I mean, anybody that's in Assyria is in a bad place.
Yeah.
But by the end of it, you're like all excited that he's back to where he started.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, that's right.
I mean,
that's right. Well, and I should say it even goes further than that, because at the end of the story, he dies. Tobit dies. But before he dies, he tells his son, listen, I've read Nahum.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And in Nahum has this dialogue with God, where it has this word from God that Assyria is going to be deeply punished. Okay, like Assyria may have been God's tool to punish Israel, but Assyria itself has something in store for it. All right, and so Tobit tells his son, "Hey, I believe that, and I just don't think this is going to be the place to be when that goes down." And so he says, "I want you to go." And so he goes to Media, and he goes to the place. He gets that money that they had put in the bank, and he also gets the inheritance of his. So
could people in captivity just go wherever they wanted to? Like,
well, that's the thing is, I don't think they're really tightly in captivity here.
Yeah.
I think they've really been transplanted, almost like refugees. But at this point, they're almost living like immigrant refugees.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay.
The answer in Babylonia was no.
Yeah.
But it seems like in this Assyrian stuff, like nobody's really watching to make sure he doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
But some of that may have been a pattern because of the freedom that Tobit had earned in service of the court. That's possible too. It may be that just he's kind of earned that privilege. Maybe they're kind of sneaking around a little bit too. Just nobody's checking. Who knows?
Okay.
Yeah, I had that question too.
Yeah.
You know, because I think it depicts. I mean, I think that's part of just the fictionalized setting of the
you
story.
don't want to go too far.
Right.
Ask too many questions.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the way they are.
So they moved to Media,
Yeah.
which is like the Persian Empire, which later is like is where Daniel.
Right. So they go, and the end of the story is, and so Tobias was there. And he heard the news that Nineveh, many years later, he heard the news that Nineveh had been destroyed. And so he celebrates, basically, because God's had the last word.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's how the story goes. Now, the whole thing kind of functions as a morality play, right? That it is, interestingly enough, even though it's pushing against that kind of notion of suffering, it kind of also is a story about, hey, look, even when times are tough, you need to remain faithful because eventually the cycle will turn, right? And God will restore what needs to be restored, and God will punish what needs to be punished.
So Jordan's asking, what did Jews think of this story? And I don't know if she means now or then, or like, is it part of their scriptures, or
yeah.
If you want to ask more about that or explain more what you mean, then feel free to do that. But
well, it's definitely well known.
Yeah.
Okay, it's well known in Judaism. It is. I don't think it is revered as canon.
Okay.
Okay, I think that's a safe way of saying. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. It is part of like the cultural movement of Judaism. Okay, I think it may be read. I'm not sure if it's read in synagogues or not. That'd be a good question to ask. I'll see if I can look at that. But I know that, like, for instance, like your rabbis, like they know this story. They're taught this story. You know, and they're very familiar with it.
I've heard, like, I don't know, because it's a podcast or something where, like, you kind of read the Apocrypha as if they were kind of like you read a commentary today. Like, it's not scripture, but it's really good to know, and you know, other people read it and they can get value out of it and stuff like that. So, you know, I don't know if that's how they think of it, but
yeah. Well, I mean, I remember reading, and I don't want to speak too much out of turn. The best way to find this out is ask somebody, I guess, you know.
Yeah.
But I do remember reading recently kind of a Twitter thread of a rabbi that I follow that was kind of drawing things out of the Tobit story for like modern circumstances. You know, she's kind of riffing on, hey, here's this story, and this is something that's kind of like it. You know.
Yeah.
You know, in our time. So that's all I can tell you, really. Okay, I think it's I think probably it's used as like a useful story, but not on the level of. So the major divisions of the Hebrew Bible are called the Tanakh. Okay, that's the
How they split it out, like Pentateuch.
acronym. That's the acronym.
Oh, there's an acronym.
It's an acronym. And so the Tanakh is the Torah, the Navaim, and the Ketuvim. Okay, and those are the Torah is the law. Okay, the first 5 books of Moses, right? The Navaim are the prophets, and so that includes the books of the prophets that we all know, but it also includes the books of Samuel and Kings
in the
prophets.
Okay.
Chronicles is actually lumped into this other set of books.
It's like the last book, right? It's like the last book in there, Scriptures.
The Chronicles, yeah, I think that's
it's like
right. Yeah, because
everything else.
But it's in this other book, which is the writings, and the writings include like the poetic books, the wisdom literature, but also Chronicles, Ruth, some of these other Esther. There's other books that are kind of historical, I guess, narrative stuff. So so it's not included in that, okay? In the main way that they think about their Bible.
Yeah.
I think it'd be more into other stuff. Part of that may be that it's what we have is not. We don't have an original Hebrew version of it. What we have, there are some fragments. We think it was written in Aramaic originally. There are fragments of old Aramaic manuscripts that we have, but nothing normal. But so the oldest manuscripts we have of Tobit are Greek, Greek version, Greek translations of it.
When do they think it was written?
A couple hundred years, AD. I mean BC. BC. Yeah. Somewhere in there, 200 or 300, something like that.
Question,
yeah. Oh, is that? I did answer the question. Okay, good. Hopefully that was useful. Anyway, that's an introduction to Tobit, and I did want to read kind of this one other section.
Do it.
Because it's there are several. One of the features of several of these books in the Apocrypha is that they contain these like prayers that I think they kind of remind me of the prayer in. Oh boy, I'm going to miss this. Is it Daniel 9, the one that's the chapter in the second section? That's a long prayer. I think so.
I don't know. There's specific chapters of Daniel. I got my Bible also.
Oh yeah, baby! I got it. Daniel 9. High five on that. Yes.
You're so smart.
Daniel 9 is like this. It kind of interrupts the prophetic part of Daniel, and there's just like one chapter that's like a random prayer in it. It's really beautiful.
Okay.
It's a really wonderful prayer. And the Apocrypha has those kinds of things too. And this is a prayer before God, and it has some beautiful poetry in it. I just want to read a little bit. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's a whole chapter long, but I want to read a few verses of it. Tobit said, "Blessed be God." This is what Tobit says after he. I guess after everything's finally done, okay? The last thing that happens is the angel tells them. Raphael reveals himself, right? And he says, he tells them the whole truth of the whole story, right? And so Raphael tells us Tobit and Tobias, he says, bless God and acknowledge him in the presence of all the living for the good things he has done for you. Bless and sing praises to his name. With fitting honor, declare to all people the deeds of God. Do not be slow to acknowledge him. It is good to conceal the secret of a king, but to acknowledge and reveal the work of God, and with fitting honor. It is good to conceal the secret of a king, but to acknowledge and reveal the work of God, and with fitting honor to acknowledge him. Do good, and evil will not overtake you. Prayer and fasting is good, but better than both is almsgiving with righteousness. Almsgiving is like a real common thing, but Tobit's very well known for his charity, his generosity. A little with righteousness is better than wealth with wrongdoing. It is better to give alms than to lay up gold. For almsgiving saves from death and purges away every evil, every sin. Those who give alms will enjoy a full life, but those who commit sin and do wrong are their own worst enemies. I will declare the whole truth to you now and conceal nothing from you. Okay, and then he goes on and says, so he says, so now when you and Sarah prayed, it was I who brought and read the record of your prayer before the glory of the Lord, and likewise whenever you would bury the dead. And that time when you did not hesitate to get up and leave your dinner to go and bury the dead, I was sent to you to test you. At the same time, God sent me to heal you and Sarah, your daughter-in-law. I am Raphael, one of the 7 angels who stand ready and enter before the glory of the Lord. Well, that's pretty interesting, right? This angel, so the story angel says, I took your prayer to God, and that God sent me to you.
Yeah.
Right? And there was this testing and then healing.
Yeah.
Right? This is kind of both of these things were together. And it says they fall down. And there's
7 angels? Isn't that a Revelation thing too? There 7 angels?
So this is kind of like...
There's 7 churches.
This is the beginning of the kind of angelology that has to do with... Like, you remember, like, one of the things that happens that we get into the New Testament, all of a sudden there's like a much more profound understanding or common understanding about demons and angels and all that kind of stuff. Like these stories are kind of where that gets developed a little bit. Okay. So anyway, so Tobit, after he falls down,
that's not the prayer.
No. That was
yeah.
That's Raphael. That's like the setup for it.
Setup.
So
Yeah,
Tobit realizes what had happened. And Tobit gets up and he says, "Blessed be God who lives forever, because His kingdom lasts throughout all ages. For He afflicts and He shows mercy. He leads down to Hades in the lowest regions of the earth, and He brings up from the great abyss. And there is nothing that can escape His hand. Acknowledge Him before the nations, O children of Israel, for He has scattered you among them. He has shown you His greatness even there. Exalt Him in the presence of every living being, because He is our Lord and He is our God. He is our Father and He is our God. He is God forever. He will afflict you for your iniquities, but He will show again show mercy on all of you. He will gather you from all the nations among whom you have been scattered. If you turn to Him with all your heart and with all your soul to do what is true before Him, then He will turn to you and He will no longer hide His face from you. Now see what He has done for you. Acknowledge Him at the top of your voice and bless the Lord of righteousness and exalt the King of the ages. In the land of my exile, I acknowledge Him." So he's still in exile, right? Still in exile. Yeah. In the land of my exile, I acknowledge Him and show His power and majesty to a nation of sinners. Turn back, you sinners, and do what is right before Him. Perhaps He may look with favor upon you and show you mercy. As for me, I exalt my God, and my soul rejoices in the King of heaven. Okay, and he's going to go on from there a good bit. Listen to this part. May He cheer all those within you who are captives. He's talking about Jerusalem. May He cheer all those within you who are captive, and love all those within you who are distressed to all generations forever. A bright light will shine to all the ends of the earth, and many nations will come to you from far away, the inhabitants of the remotest parts of the earth, to your holy name, bearing gifts in their hands for the King of heaven. Generation after generation will give joyful praise in you, and the name of the chosen city will endure forever. So there's this kind of turn. He kind of does some blessing of Jerusalem here in the second half of it. But man, that prayer and that part about where he like says to the nations, right? To the nations, you sinners need to repent. Maybe God will have favor on you too, you know. And then the part where he says like, in my exile, right? In my exile, acknowledge that. Like, what's the purpose of that? Well, he's trying to speak to the Jews who are suffering and say to them, even in the middle of those dark days, that's when you need to turn to God and give praise, right? I just find that to be a really wise and insightful story. I mean, I think that's really a great perspective. And so when Jesus comes and He's teaching about, hey, blessed are you who are persecuted.
Yeah. Right?
I mean, this is the kind of thing this is the sort of cultural stuff that He's drawing on.
Yeah.
You know, there are a lot of these kind of motifs that I think are pretty significant. So, anyway, that's Tobit. I would highly recommend that you read it sometime. Yeah. It's just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful little story, and it's pretty fun to read.
So, do you think that the kind of theology that comes out of Tobit was part of Israel's theology that they had, or was this something that they were kind of developing as they were writing?
Well, I think it's both.
Story, and that it helped develop it further.
I think I definitely think it helps develop it further. I mean, I think it's drawing on, like, a lot of the themes that we just said. Well, those themes are in the Hebrew Bible.
Right.
They're not like it's not like he's the first person to be like, there's something about being faithful in the middle of suffering.
Yeah, right.
But he's telling it in new ways, and he's giving it some new context. And I do think
kind
he's
of like
developing
inspiring to read as you're Israelite that was in captivity or something.
I think it's just good literature, right? And I think good literature does teach you something, right? Whether it's Tobit or Dostoevsky, or whoever. I think it offers you a perspective on what it means to take a certain set of values, which you may or may not completely share with the author, right? But take a certain set of values and apply them to, like, the way people live in the world and understand their lives, right? And in Tobit, everything is, like, dialed up, so it's really extreme. Like, so you read it, and you don't think to yourself, when you read Sarah's story, you don't think to yourself, oh yeah, that's very similar to something that happened to me.
Yeah,
it's comically bad,
hyperbolic, or
it's even beyond. It's like a Kill Bill or something,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like their version of like an over-the-top slasher film that also is teaching you, look.
Some of Jesus' parables are like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Yeah. It's just good. All good stories are like that, right?
Yeah.
You don't tell a good story that's like, oh, Bob went to the store and bought some pot pies, and he came home and he cooked them, and he went to bed. Like, that's not. Yeah. It's a terrible story.
Well.
I mean,
pot pies.
It might be a nice night, but it's not a great story. Right, a great story has these kind of ups and downs, and that's what we get here. Let's see. I think next week let's do something a little bit different. Okay. Next week, let's do something that rides the line of history a little bit closer, and let's talk about the Maccabees.
All right. Now, that's a lot of reading. If you want to read through
we are not going to read the whole of that. I'm not going to read the whole of it.
Right? And there's many chapters.
There are four books of the Maccabees, but they're not all... I don't think they're all included. I thought. Maybe it's just two. Maybe you're right about that.
I think if there's more than two, then they're not in... So first
No,
Maccabees,
there's a third. There's a third Maccabees right there, baby. So...
Well, it's not in this version.
It's not in that version?
So, no.
Yeah, I kind of think there are four total book of Maccabees.
So it's about
books.
there's 31 chapters.
Man, you have me sweating that for a second there, buddy.
Hey, I'm just telling you what I'm reading.
Yeah, so we're not going to ask people to read all four of them.
Okay.
But what we will do is, I just want to take a couple of sections about the actual stories, because they give a very particular lens. And I'll tell you what, you about can't understand the real cultural, historical setting of the New Testament without really an appreciation of what happens in the Maccabean revolt. So anyway, we'll talk about that next week, and we'll draw some of that and read some passages of it, and you'll get a sense of how it's similar to some of our literature, perhaps, or at least explain some of it, but also some of the difference in it too.
Yeah, and how it sets up everything for the New Testament, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, all right. Well, guys, thank you so much again, and appreciate your jumping on with us to look at this zany book of Tobit. Hope you enjoy reading it. Okay, all right. Peace.
Bye.